I'm Charlotte McLeod with investingnews.com, and here today with me is Rick Rule, proprietor at Rule Investment Media. Thank you so much for being here, although I always say when we're at your conference that really I'm here with you, so thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for gracing us with your presence.
Of course. So we're here at the Rule Symposium. We've made it a few days in, so I think it's a fair time to ask you what themes you've seen emerge from the speakers and, of course, also from the attendees.
I think your own audience, will be interested to know that despite the fact that there appears to be a malaise in mining shares and precious metals, that there's a lot of interest in both. The audience that's here, both live and virtual, has expressed an interest in deploying capital. This isn't an audience that's afraid. This is an audience that's aggressive. And I think that there's a subnote that people need to pay attention to, that high-quality issuers are still raising money. They're still raising money easily. And there is a lot of investor interest in liquidity in high-quality junior companies. The second theme that I think has emerged to me is, even with a fairly sophisticated audience, the degree to which the popular debate is dominated by popular paradigm, which is to say the mainstream media paradigm, still seems to me to be incredible. The tolerance that investors have for the depreciation and the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar is an example. Even among a fairly sophisticated audience like this, it tells me, and I don't mean to be flattering, but it tells me that there's a lot of room for alternative media, including your own. I would say that those are the themes that have been predominant for me.
Okay, well, those are definitely good things to hear, really. You've assembled a great group of people, as usual, to come to the stages and talk to us. Have you learned anything so far? What's the most interesting thing you've heard?
In fairness, I think I've learned a lot. Jim Rickard's is always interesting when he talks about the history of current events, not how things happened over the last week, but rather where they came from. When he talks about, as an example, the weaponization of the U.S. dollar really beginning with the then Secretary of the Treasury, John Connally, in the Nixon administration saying, "Our currency is your problem." The United States threatened to internationalize the imposition of U.S. values through the currency in 1968. That understanding of history, as an example, I think is extremely important. On a much more cellular level, every public company that's an exhibitor here is owned in my accounts or accounts I managed. But being able to walk around booth to booth and question to people one-on-one about companies that I thought I knew about, the amount that you can learn by asking, even when you thought you understood things well, is amazing to me.
Okay, so I think that should be a lesson to everybody. If you're still learning, even about the companies that you brought here, there's so much for your average person to pick up. And I think that's an interesting point you made about taking a step back and getting that big historical view. However, I think it can be difficult for people to recognize when they need to take the step back and get the big picture, when they need to hone in and get the detailed picture. So any advice you can share there?
Sadly, of course, you need to do both. I think it's important that investors, and I only want to speak about investors here because I don't know much about much else. I think it's important that investors continue to question their paradigm, as an example. And I think it's important to try and get a lot of points of view, but I think it's important to have a worldview too. But a worldview isn't where you make your money. A worldview is how you shape your finances so that you understand what you're doing, and it's also how you limit your mistakes. But you make your money where the rubber meets the road. So let's look at the conference as sort of a way to discuss what you just said. We try to bring big picture thinkers in place that have a certain worldview. It's contrarian, it's value-oriented, it's libertarian, not what you see in the mainstream media. If you agree with that big picture point of view, you go to door A. If you don't, you go to door B. Door B doesn't lead to this conference, only door A does. So once you've decided that this this worldview is something that's going to shape the way that you live and the way that you act. It's important, I think, to align yourself with analysts and portfolio managers whose strategies mirror what's necessary for that worldview. And we've tried to do that here. We bring in people who have done resources for 30 or 40 years. They didn't fail at crypto and then fail at narcotics, and then what we try to do as a value add that I think all of your listeners need to do too is examine the actions of serially successful people. So we have something called the living legends, which are people who have built multi-billion-dollar companies in natural resources from scratch. We're trying to take the worldview and distill it to actionable information. And the last thing that we do here is we limit the exhibitors to people who we know well enough that we own them. And I think that investors need to do the same thing that we've done with the conference themselves. They need to shape the worldview, and they need to continue to question their worldview. When they establish what they think is actionable in terms of a worldview, they need to relate tactically to how to do it. They need to refresh themselves in terms of the sectors that they're interested in by people who have been serially successful. If you are an investor, as an example, who, let's say just for fun that Charlotte McLeod owns a lumber yard or something like that, your life is wrapped up in that part of your business and your life and things like that. If you decide that you're going to invest in gold, you need to review the actions of somebody who spends their life doing gold. And I think that's important. I think that's the lesson. The macro is important? Absolutely. But the micro is where the money's made.
Exactly. Okay. I'm going to shift us over a little bit to current events now. And this is very current as we speak right now. We just had news from the Fed, 25 basis point rate hike, I think, as many people expected. However, I think one of the comments that has stuck with me so far at this event came from Dr. Nomi Prince, who was talking about how maybe we give too much attention to the Fed. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
I think it depends on who you are. If you're a trader, if your orientation is shorter term, you have to pay attention to the Fed. Buffett said that no investment he's made for the last 50 years in his life would have mattered had he known what the Fed was going to do 2 years ahead of time. It really depends on what you do for a living. I'm increasingly coming to Buffett's point of view. It's odd, but as I have less time left on Earth, I become more patient. So for me, understanding the perceptions of other investors is part of why I watch the Fed, but I care less and less about what the Fed is going to do. I believe, as an example, of the inexorable decline of the real purchasing power of the U.S. dollar, while simultaneously believing that the U.S. dollar will hold value relative to other fiat currencies. In other words, it'll degrade less badly. The consequence of that is that a 25 basis point increase is of some interest to me in terms of gauging other people's response to it, but I'm much more interested in how much money a company is going to make over the next 5 years than what the Fed's going to do over the next 90 days.
Okay, interesting to see your take on that. And having said that all about the Fed, I am going to ask another Fed question because I've heard people speaking quite a bit here about this new FedNow system. I wondered if you could give us an explanation, quick explanation, and your thoughts on the impact.
It's horrifying for me. The FedNow is, I think, a settlement system designed as a foundation for a central bank digital currency. And the idea that my government wants to superimpose a different layer of control on me is something I don't like. The idea that they have a currency unit that they can cancel, and the cancelable technology is built in there, calls into mind a recent circumstance in Canada where your prime minister objected to the political group of the truckers, as an example, and retroactively made contributing to them illegal and seized the bank accounts of Canadians. The idea that he wouldn't have to seize them, but rather press a button and cancel them is terrifying to me, absolutely terrifying to me. So, well, FedNow is proposed as a more efficient settlement system, a more efficient point-to-point system. we have a settlement system in place now on a global basis called SWIFT, which the U.S. has weaponized. The U.S. decided that because they disagreed with what the Russians did, that they could, in effect, seize or cancel $200 billion worth of Russian assets. If they can do it to the Russians, they can do it to you.
Okay, interesting. I have been hearing a lot of this slippery slope kind of commentary. A counterpoint that I've heard is that, they can see your credit card transactions, or as you gave the example about the Canadian truckers, it already happened. But so for you, is the difference that it can be more instantaneous? Oh, there you go.
Not cancelable. Your money, not cancelable. In my fist. If I had U.S. dollars and I was afraid of the U.S. government, as an example, and I wanted to deposit them in the United Arab Emirates or Switzerland or some other place like that, I realized that my own defense mechanisms might be more appropriate to me, but I'm concerned about me. There's an order of magnitude difference between cash and a central bank digital currency. If you combine the central bank digital currency with artificial intelligence, with the Chinese social credit scoring, where that leads is truly ugly. From an American context, your American audience needs to think, if, as an example, they're Republican, how would they feel about Biden being able to cancel their currency if he didn't like the way they think? By contrast, if you're a Democrat, how would you like it if Trump's finger was on the trigger? Neither of those circumstances are attractive to me. I think Canadians have a more recent exposure to the draconian nature of the official response to dissent. And I think that you need to look at central bank digital currencies in that sense.
Yeah, and another theme I've kind of seen emerging here is, okay, these things are going on. We probably can't control as single people these things that are going on, but you can control your reaction and what you do. So maybe we could have some thoughts and advice there.
Charlotte, that's absolutely critical. I mean, the first is, irrespective of the risks, don't quit. I have some people I talk to that are Canadians, and they say, like, what chance do I have with Trudeau? Well, if you don't take a shot, you don't have a chance for sure. Michael Jordan in basketball once said he missed every shot he didn't take, right? So you can't be paralyzed into insecurity. I think it's incumbent on people that have the ability to do so, first of all, to diversify. I think it's important, as Doug Casey famously says, and pardon the off-color comment, you got to have, if you can, your passport, your assets, and your ass in 3 different locations. There shouldn't be too much synchronicity in terms of what you do. But the second thing is, and this is more important, you need to invest in yourself. Education, skill sets, personal brand and reputation. Can't be stolen. As you age like me, it can be lost slowly. But only the sort of product of it can be taxed. So remember that your most important asset is an intangible asset. It's your reputation, it's your intelligence, it's your training, it's your ability to generate utility for others. I think that's very important. I think despite the fact that the purchasing power in fiat currency denominated savings products goes down every year, that you have to maintain liquidity. I understand perfectly that by maintaining liquidity, the purchasing power of that liquidity is declining. But in my life, I've experienced 3 fairly, how would you say, fairly terrifying liquidity squeezes, 2008 being the most, the biggest example. Having liquidity gives you the tools, and if you're psychologically prepared, the courage to do something about it. And I believe part of that liquidity should be in gold. I believe that people should own bullion. And by the way, I believe that they should own it both as liquidity and as an insurance class. There are some people here at this conference who I've talked to who can't wait for the gold price to be $6,000 or $7,000. And I've tried to explain to them gently, because they're my customers, be very careful what you wish for. The set of circumstances that would cause gold to be $6,000 or $7,000 would wreak havoc in the rest of your life. So own gold, be prepared to sell it. Don't be prepared to marry it. Be prepared to sell it when other assets, if other assets fall dramatically in price enough, that it makes sense to make the switch. And when you own it, pray, if you pray, that the price doesn't go up.
Okay. And, for more on gold and also on uranium, we did a very recent interview that people can look at, and I'll link to it here. That's why I'm not going to touch too heavily on those topics right now. I'm going to wrap us up with a couple of user or viewer questions. I always find them quite interesting. And so these were submitted for people for you. First one is, do you think it makes sense for large oil companies to buy uranium and nuclear companies as a hedge? So I believe some oil and gas companies have made clean tech plays, but this was an interesting thought to me.
I think that uranium has a lot of upside, but I think oil has a lot of upside. I think you do what you do best. In my experience, which goes back now 49 years as an investor, most investors are better off with businesses that they understand well. Diversification, Warren Buffett once termed as diversification. I remember as an example when Mobil Oil Company bought Montgomery Ward's, the supermarket. When Exxon bought Reliance Electric, thinking that electric motors were somehow energy. My preference when I own an oil and gas company is that they focus on oil and gas. And if they have surplus, the capital that's surplus to their needs in the oil and gas business, that they give it back to me.
I think that makes a whole lot of sense. And the second one is also kind of on the energy note. Helium supply shortage. Any thoughts on what's going on there?
I'm studying helium as we speak. Some very smart people who are clients of mine and friends of mine are really, really, really aggressive on the helium theme. I don't know enough about it to burden your viewers with a comment, but I need to say that I'm working hard on that topic now.
I think that's probably enough for people to get some direction. That's all I have for you for now, unless you had any final words that you want to leave everyone with.
Well, simply thank you for coming down to the conference and your efforts to support the conference and your efforts to support Rule Investment Media year in, year out. I'm absolutely delighted that you're on my team. I look forward to visiting with you as often as you see fit in the future.
Thank you so much again for having me. It's always a great event to come to, and hopefully we'll be back next year as well. Great. Once again, I'm Charlotte McLeod with investingnews.com, and this is Rick Rule. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, make sure you subscribe to our channel. We'd also love to hear your thoughts, so leave us a comment below. We'll see you next time.